People of Reddit working in extreme situations as offshore oil rigs, miners, seamen etc. What was your FCK this, I'm out moment? I worked in a shipyard off the Great Lakes on tankers and cargo ships. I'll preface this by saying I loved and miss this job every day. I work in an office now and it's boring. One time I was working in a bilge tank with another guy named Ryan. We repaired a section of a bulkhead, cut out and replaced a section with new steel. We had the old 4x4 piece of steel tied up. Made sure our knot was secure. He went up top to pull it up and I stayed down on the catwalk to help the load clear the ladder. Halfway up the rope snapped and the steel fell about an inch from me onto the catwalk, barely missing my head. I look up at Ryan for confirmation that I almost died. I pick up the piece to tie up and try again. And the catwalk collapses under the combined weight. Just another day though. My last day there I was helping my dad and a couple other guys move staging. I'm leaning over a hole between decks reaching for a plank. These are 100-pound planks of wood. 2 guys below, 2 guys up top. Just as I get my hand on the plank, both guys below heave upwards, crushing my hand between it and the deck. I instantly knew my thumb was broken and walked out immediately, never to return. Yeah. My dad broke my thumb. Laying civil pipe. Foreman quit on the job. I'm in the ditch. 75-year-old superintendent says I used to run a track hoe all the time and hops in and starts digging. He proceeds to knock my hard hat off my head with the bucket of the F-king hoe while I'm hand digging around a T for a hydrant. Left the vest in the ditch. Climbed out of the box and never looked back. Edit. To address many of the comments. Yes, most of the time you are working in very close proximity to the machinery. You learn early on never to get in the ditch unless you trust the operator with your life. You also learn to never take your eyes off the operator. I ignored this one time and it could have killed me. We had a guy killed by a track hoe on a site I was on. It can and does happen. One wrong flick of the wrist is all it can take around machinery like that. Also, I'm still laying pipe into the ditch most nights if ya know what I'm saying. Close bracket. I spent 2 weeks being lowered into the ballast tanks of Great Lakes or carriers in Milwaukee in December. The tanks are about the size of a railroad boxcar and they all have about 3 feet of mud in them. I had the vacuum cleaner from hell and sucked up all the mud while trying not to freeze to death. When that job was done I was put in a full protection suit and SCBA and crawled into the exhaust system of the ship's main engine with a solvent gun and I scraped diesel exhaust soot out of the 3 feet diameter exhaust pipes. I wanted to quit every single day but I was making the present day equivalent of $115 an hour. $170 an hour on overtime. I didn't quit. I work for a contracting company who handles a lot of maintenance in an iron ore mine up in Canada. One of the many sketchiest moments I've ever had was having to crawl on a structural beam 50 feet in the air underneath a floating crusher hopper and hold on occasionally when the haul trucks would dump 250 plus tons of rocks only a couple feet above my head. What made it even more terrible wasn't the fact that the whole plant would shake, but all the structural support plates actually reinforcing the hopper walls were all sheared off. I've had hydraulic jacks break off their strong backs and go flying past my head. I've seen a co-worker get launched 6 feet in the air by a belt being pulled taut by a shuttle. Things fall down and nearly kill someone. Not to mention heat exhaustion while working on the induration machines. Building size furnaces used to bake iron pellets. Easily 122 degrees plus. Or outside changing conveyor belt rollers in -40. I've had my fair share of near misses and seen a bit of wild shit. Mines can be pretty dangerous. People do lose fingers, hands, arms and sometimes their lives. People like to think that we've improved in safety and in some aspects it's true. However, the attitude is still very much you want a job? Do it. Double quote. Not me but my brother worked on a North Sea oil barge. His buddies found out he would be getting married after the current 2-week shift and in the middle of the night they pinned him down, shaved his entire body and gave him tattoos using indelible marker pens. He had some explaining to do on his honeymoon and stopped working offshore after that. They gave us a pizza party. I spent a few months loading trucks for a major package shipping company. Every night. Starting at 11 PM. I would stack boxes. One every 12 seconds, supposedly. In one night. I'd fill at least one of those giant 18-wheeler trailers with boxes. Crates. Industrial materials. Car parts. Flowers by mail. Presents. And an endless flow of Amazon packages. I worked each night with not enough sleep. Doing exhausting labor. Moving heavy dangerous machinery. And got heavy packages dropped on my head almost every night. We got one 15-minute break a night. One day. During our break. They told us that our section had been the most productive in the shipping hub that month. And as such. We were going to be given pizza. By the way. We couldn't actually relax during our break. We had to listen to announcements and safety tips. The next night. Sure as God made little green apples. We got pizza. To eat as quickly as we could during our break. And as I sat there. Eating my kinda stale. Cheapest possible pizza. I thought to myself. Fuck this. I don't need this job that bad. Double quote. I never went back after that shift. Dad was a traveling salesman and was very dedicated. Insisted on cross-country trips for high-end clients. Would go days without sleep. Traveling through tribal areas and mountain highways dead of night. But he was also a Nave guy in his 20s, so picked up a random hitchhiker because it was raining and he felt bad. The dude pulled a gun on him. Told him stop the car. My dad had cash in the car. And in addition to being Nave, was also stubborn as shit and started accelerating. So if the guy shot him, the car would go flying off the hill. They reached some gas station with armed tribesmen. Tribal people aren't very nice to criminals, and the hijacker quickly put his gun away and walked off. My dad left the business after a couple more reckless incidents and family pressure. I worked at sea on fishing boats for a number of years as a biologist. One boat sank and I had to be rescued by the Coast Guard. A couple of boats caught on fire. I was in storms that I thought would kill me. But the reason I quit was because my boss was a dick. People don't quit jobs as often as they quit bosses. Very true. I left my previous job because of my boss. I work for half my previous salary now, but for a guy I know and with whom we see eye to eye. I was a trainee on a North Sea drilling rig. A mud engineer. We were drilling and hit a pocket of H2S gas, explosive and highly toxic. We had gas detectors which went off the scale. The pit room, big tanks of mud with huge pumps to pump mud down the well, was evacuated, but the mud pumps were still running. Somebody had to go back in, open the emergency air ventilation and shut down the pumps. I drew the short straw and put the respirator on, very old and possibly F-ked. ND wandered in. That was the longest 2 minutes of my life. I don't work offshore anymore. I've worked in the oil field for over a decade, and whomever was in charge should have been brought up on criminal charges for allowing a trainee to enter a known hazardous area to do anything. You should have been sent immediately to muster station and someone with more experience and training sent to perform this task. I worked fixing railway tracks for a while. Digs were horrible. The traveling was horrible. The tools were never in good enough condition. There's a spotters round the corners, if you're ever working near a bend, with a button to cut all our tools off if there's a train coming. About 9 of us working and we hear the train before seeing it. We just get the tools and our bodies clear as a train comes flying past. Go down the track to see what happened and the spotter is sat with his phone having a Tommy crank. Couldn't keep working with people like that. That was the last straw. Pipe welder. I was sitting on the throat of a 16 inches weld 90 making a torch cut. I was 25 feet above a boiler that could not be shut down. Because of how high I was and a man lift was not an option, I had to sit on the pipe I was cutting. 1 stroke 3 into the cut, slag flew out of my cut and landed in my boot. I could not take my boot off for risk of falling. 4 months later my 3rd degree burns healed. It was unfortunate, but pipe welding is awesome and I loved the crew I worked with. I no longer am in this trade though for personal reasons. A bit different than the rest of these, but I am a biologist and I've done quite a bit of field work. One job, I was working in Alaska and we were living in a tent in the bush for the summer. We were in a pretty bear heavy area and working with salmon put us right in the heart of their habitat. We had a bear fence surrounding the camp that was recharged on solar power. But apparently it came unhooked and no one noticed because we woke up to a grizzly pawing at our tent. My partner's screams scared it off pretty good, but we were definitely a lot more careful after that. Working overseas in East Africa. I was helping lay out and design a human waste to fuel plant. The existing system is a 100 foot by 100 foot by 40 foot deep pit where the trucks come from the city to dump the waste. And then it just sits there. It was normally not terrible. Except when trucks came by. Then it stunk. And the flies. Oh god, the flies. The first week I was there, a truck came up to the pit. Backed up. And a dude came out to open the valve to release the honey. It shoots out then comes to a stop. It looked like a plastic bag had gotten stuck in there. First the guy tried hitting it with a pole or a shovel. That does not work. So he climbs out around the back of the truck, see 30 foot deep shitty pit above. And then grabs it. And yanks. It pulls free and a horizontal geyser of shitty blasts him in the face. I was like, nope. Double quote. Same location. Happy story. A few weeks later a kitten was seen floating in the pit and meowing piteously. The local shitty pit workers and landfill guys take pity on it and try to kill it with rocks. So it doesn't drown. Fucking dark. I know. My co-worker was like, no. 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 And he found a rope. And a bucket and went shit kitty fishing. And damn me did he not rescue that cat. He brought it home. Washed it 1000 times. And last I heard it was doing fine. I don't usually work in extreme situations. I'm a directional drill operator for underground utilitites. So it's fairly safe. But there was one job I had in Virginia for an electric conduit for a new launch pad for Wallops Island. Where we had a very small amount of time to get a lot done. There was a week-long period where there was an intense thunderstorm every day. And we delayed the job as much as we could until we decided to say FCK it and work through it because we were falling so far behind. Directional drills have an alarm for when the machine is electrified by, say, drilling through a power line. My strike alarm began to constantly chime from lightning crashes. I silently got in the truck and left. IDK of extreme, but I have 9 years in the Navy as submariner. My FCKU moment that set it in was when we were working pretty much 14 hours days 7 days a week in Dridok. Think we did it for over a month and then we went out to sea for about 3 months. Glad I didn't have a family then, but just being at work all the time and stuck in a metal tube for months on end just sucked. The couple of fond memories don't outweigh the massive number of stupid shit. During my apprenticeship, electrician, had a supervisor that would regularly arrive drunk. High, ice meth, and still on a bender from the night before. I haven't slept, so you've no excuse to be tired because you had night classes like WTF. Anyway. Warning signs were there, so skip ahead 6 months. I'm wiring a 100 kilowatt package AC and he thinks it will be funny to throw the breaker and watch my ratchet cutters explode. I later found out he's done this before. Only problem was I'd already cut, stripped and lugged said cable. Took 415 across one arm. Entry and exit burns. Was my last job with those clown. Management knew, but hey, we've got a soft spot for him. Worked in a Conagra turkey slaughterhouse, read as Butterball, for a couple of months as an investigator. I developed carpal tunnel in that short amount of time. I saw otherwise good people do horrible things to the birds as a result of the institutionalization of cruelty. I saw and documented people who work nights at potato processing plants and mornings days at Conagra smoking meth in order to stay awake on the job, and I felt empathy for them. So don't interpret that as me questioning their character. I stopped at a gas station before work one morning to get a coffee and a quick bite. When I got back in my truck, the sadness that I was getting ready to walk into hit me like it hadn't before. My hands were numb. My heart was heavy. And I hadn't even driven past the guard shack yet. I decided to sleep in that parking space for a couple of hours instead of reporting for my shift. When I woke up, I just headed home. Those places are worse than you can understand by reading about them or watching documentaries. They're just voids. Was on an aircraft carrier with 6,000 of my closest homies for 9 months. 3/4 of the toilets on board became non-operational all at the same time. For a month. When you have to resort to shitting in the shower and waffle stomping it down the drain, it's time to move on. When you are shitting in line mop buckets and having to throw it overboard, it's time to move on. This issue had to be resolved 3 different times on one deployment. Fuck that. Spent some time on the bush, I see. Not sure how long you were there, but in the shipyard after that deployment they decided they needed to fix the head system. I think they added extra adductor pumps or something. The deployment after that had much fewer head issues. However, since they were behind in the shipyard, instead of fixing half of the ship at a time, they decided to just do it all at once, which meant taking down all the heads. All of them. For 2 weeks. Most people stayed on the barge for their duty days. But for us in reactor department we had to stay on board for our duty days. On a ship with no bathrooms or sinks. My buddy got a counseling chit for walking to the bathroom on the pier after getting off watch and morning quarters. He was walking there to use the bathroom and also shave. He had his razor in his pocket. He got in trouble for not shaving. Can't make this shit up. I used to work in the steel industry. Once had a blast furnace explode and pepper my office with glowing hot iron pellets. Had I worked that night, worked the previous midnight, I would have been at my desk that caught on fire from molten iron ore. My parking space was covered as well, so my car would have been toast even if I had lived. I decided to look for another field after that, and then really did when the guy down the hallway from me was sucked into a conveyor and died a few weeks later. I work for a pool service company in a college town. I was going to backwash one of the filters and went to turn off the pump. Everything is fine at first. I backwash the filter and fill my area with a small puddle of water. I go to turn the pump back on and touch the back panel, which is live for some reason. I got shocked with 220 V, which went through me into the puddle and fried the other pump for the cleaner. Scary shit to happen when you are ankle deep in water. My husband works as an underground potash miner. They travel 1 kilometer, 6 miles, straight down to mine the potash. He has been trapped underground for 2 straight days with no food and no communication to the outside world. And he has had the back, ceiling, fallen on him and injure his arm and shoulder. A friend and co-worker of his was crushed and killed by the same thing happening when he couldn't get under the belt line fast enough. He is currently continuing it only long enough to save for college because he said the money isn't worth it anymore. I briefly worked at a coal mine in Appalachia that was privately owned and basically operating check to check. We had a 60 boom truck with a 460/4 speed that was basically hidden on the ground looking like it was abandoned. We had a Cat 988 loader that was a tremendous piece of shit, and the motor had scattered for the millionth time, so I was sent to grab the boom truck so we could swap engines. I hopped in it, fired it up, and headed down the haul road towards the finds pile, and the damn brakes were gone. It was bouncing and picking up speed even though I had it in granny, so I just slammed the trans into reverse. I got the truck stopped, but not before I scared the shit out of myself. From that day on, the trans had reverse and second cause. I must have bent the linkage. The mine owner was convinced some kids were joyriding in the truck, and I never admitted what I had done. I also broke the brake pedal off of that cat because I was trying to stop it and it just wasn't stopping. And I was too inexperienced to just drop the bucket before panic set in. All I could see was the 4160 volt AC line strung overhead, and the cab was heading right for it. I got stopped, but it scared me. I got out of there as soon as I could. I got a summer job with a roofing contractor when I was in college. We were replacing a tar and gravel roof on a really large, about 2-acre, warehouse. My job consisted of pushing a wheelbarrow full of peat gravel from the conveyor belt, which extended to the edge of the roof, to the work area where other guys were mopping hot tar on the surface to be covered with gravel. The molten tar was lifted onto the roof in large containers on wheels with a spigot to release the tar onto the roof surface once the container was pushed to the work area. Just before lunch on my first day of work, one of the guys working with the tar pot was receiving a fresh container of molten tar on the edge of the roof, and the hoist didn't lift the container quite high enough for the wheels to clear the roof, flashing, and the whole container of molten tar spilled onto the guy on the roof. I think he died before the fire department got here with rescue equipment. All the guys who tried to pull off his clothes off got second and third degree burns on their hands and arms, even though they all had leather gloves. When I left for lunch, I never went back. Instead, I got a job on a farm baling hay for the rest of the summer. Didn't make much money, but I didn't die either. I have worked a number of jobs in the oil field, and am currently a pipeline consultant in South Texas. One of my first oil field jobs was drilling surface in West Texas. Since we were drilling surface, the collars we were using were 12 inches big and weighed over 2,500 pounds. To make the connection on each joint, the collar was raised up and towed in on the winch line. I was told to go up in a man lift, flush up with the derrick, and while the driller released tension on the winch line, I was expected to unscrew the fitting, hold the collar steady as it was just sitting on the stump below, nod made up, and then stab the collar into the top drive by hand. There were a few times the collar slipped off the threads below. The driller would come down with the top drive while my hands were on top of the collar, pulling as hard as I could to keep it from falling into the derrick, etc. Just an extremely dangerous way to make each connection, and we had many close calls, but I was too green to know what a lay-down machine was. I quit as soon as I got an offer for a safety job rigging up H2S systems on rigs. I've worked undersupplied air with 30,000 ppm H2S and never once felt as scared as I did making those connections. Directional driller on a BP land rig in Wamsutter, WY. Commonly 10 to -30 degrees with constant 30-40 mph winds. But that wasn't the bad part. I worked 25-40 hours shifts with 2 hours of sleep in between. 7 days a week for 35-40 days at a time, and 1 day off between due to driving time home. 26 well pads, and they had me single manning all the surface holes because they couldn't hire enough people. Decided then and there I'd save up money, quit, and never work for anyone except myself ever again. Health related issues due to overwork, lack of sleep, and stress ended up forcing me to quit a bit early. But I still think FCK that. Never going back again. I worked as a commercial fisherman with my cousin. Dragging out the net was the scariest part. Between the fear of getting my hands crushed in the net or falling overboard. Every time my cousin would tell me to do something as this was going on, I just froze. Between this, getting 2 hours of sleep a night, having to captain the boat at night, there's legit no visibility on a boat, and my cousin yelling at me anytime I did something wrong. I barely knew him, and never felt much of a connection since he was adopted, but had to take this job because it was a seriously bad situation. So I was like, I'm outta here. Except I'm on a boat, so you can't be. But the final moment was afterward, when I heard from his roommate about the sexual thing that happened between him and his sister, the biological cousin, who killed herself almost a year prior. Oh. Nice. My cousin's a rapist. Yeah. Peace out, motherfuckers. I'm a marine engineer, and the following story comes from one of the older divers who works for us. He used to be a general construction diver until this incident. The dive crew was up at a mine to do some kind of work on the processing plant outflow into a tailings pond. Supposedly, 60 feet to the east of the dive site, there was some kind of intake for water reprocessing. In the recent past, the steel grating on the intake pipe had been replaced, and so the mine superintendent figured it would be safe to leave the intake pump running during the dive since time is money. Long story short, it wasn't. The intake was actually 20 feet away, and the grating hadn't been installed properly and was actually laying on the tailing pond bottom. The poor diver who went in the water got sucked into a 14-inch pipe, and then into the impeller housing. All the boat crew could do was hear him screaming through the radio until the umbilical was severed. I worked with a civil and welding engineering company in Northern Ontario for a few years. Lots of maintenance jobs for dangerous places like heavy crane, converter aisles, working under the furnaces, acid car train loadouts. Only lasted 3 years before I realized you either got hurt on the job or would end up with respiratory issues or cancer. Noped out to a nice office job out west. Edit. If there was one specific event that made me start looking for an exit, it would have to be when I was working on replacing tie rods under a furnace. I was in multiple layers of PPE. Basically everything but a full SCBA system and walking in nickel dust up to my knees, think powdered cancer. Full-time converter employee was dragging in a light rig on an extension cable and not wearing anything besides a hard hat, backwards, and safety glasses. Asked him where his PPE was and I got written up for pestering a union worker. 5 days ago a dude on the boat next to me got decapitated by the mast boom rigging. They just left the headless body on the deck as they drove back into port. Or years ago I witnessed another guy get his rein hair caught in a deck winch and rip his arm off. Or another when a guy got his hand stuck in his gear while setting out in shitty weather. Saw his body washed up on a sandbar after the storm passed completely wrapped up in the mesh. There's more. But this will probably be too buried to be seen. In Marines in the desert training. Guy in our platoon got bit by a rattlesnake. He is freaking out. Can't find the corpsman. Asks our company gunny if he knows where any corpsmen are that he was bit by a rattlesnake. The gunny yells at him for being out of uniform because he took his shirt off. He spent a good 2 minutes yelling at him telling him it doesn't matter what happened, he shouldn't be out of uniform. I decided that day I was done. I was working a concrete pipe on site job where there was a mid-Atlantic crane and I was the only English speaking person working there. On my last day after about 14 hours of being there I was pouring concrete into a cast when it clogged. One of the workers thought it would be funny to come by and slam the handle down on the vat I was trying to clear. The handle goes all the way around the side and my hand was right where it slammed into the side of the vat. My middle and ring finger was squirting blood out of the ends and I was walking around in the warehouse looking for the supervisor who I realized had gone home hours earlier. No one could speak English and anyone I showed just laughed. None of them got me any first aid. I wrapped my shirt around it and went home. I work fixing all the mobile equipment in an alloy foundry. We had a super bad rainstorm one night. To the point that we had water not only falling from cracks in the roof but also water coming up from the cracks in the floor. Within 30 minutes we had over 4 inches of water surround the furnaces. If you don't know, molten metals and water do not mix very well. The bad part was the supervisor kept telling everyone to keep moving molten metal and to keep adding metal to the furnaces. If at any point that motel metal hits the water it goes boom real quick. I ended up walking out. Got a call the next day begging me to come back. FCK that. Edit. If anyone is wondering. Out of the 30 people that were back in the foundry only one other person walked out. And I'm pretty sure they said anything to the rest of the plant. Which was a lot more people. I worked at Radio Shack. Trust me, it's dangerous because it was in the most ghetto part of the city. We got robbed every day. Someone tied up our night person and beat him in the safe room. We had homeless people raid the store for canned air. It was so bad we stopped caring and wouldn't react if someone came, ripped the TV off the wall and left. Moment I said screw it was when my co-worker came in high as hell and brought his buddies and started stealing HDMI cables. I called my manager, quit, and went home. Working the drilling rigs in Utah. Pretty much that whole crew was spun to the nuts. I was floor hand. One step above the worm. Well, the driller was high as shit. As per usual. So high he was swatting bugs that weren't there. And this was an old rig. Manual brakes. Not a top drive. Had to throw chain to brake connection. We were tripping pipe out of the hole. We had just racked a stand. And the elevators were coming back down. And fast. The driller was doing his thing and I see that he's away from the F-king handle. I yell for the worm to move his ass. Cause he was where he shouldn't have been. I yell at the driller to get the FCK on the handle. Neither one listens. 8,000 pounds of iron came crashing down out of the derrick. Crushed the worm. I had to take a hose and spray his brain off my boot. I quit roughnecking that day.